Hello and welcome to the Midweek live stream from the Permaculture Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Scott Mann. I'm here today to talk about a question that came up on a recent post that I had on Patreon, where I was polling the members there about what classes or courses they would be interested in having me offer in 2022. And in there, Pierre raised the question about including more conversations about business in the permaculture design course, so that when students of the PDC graduate, that they have a bit of knowledge about what they could do with their PDC, as well as how to that's better. As well as what they can expect professionally as a permaculture designer after graduation. And I wanted to address that today because it's something that's come up in conversations a number of times, is just this idea of what does professional permaculture look like? What is it for us when we've taken a permaculture design course and then want to do something after? Which is also changing my perspective on what a permaculture design course should include and what we should be teaching as part of that curriculum. But when it comes to permaculture as a full-time endeavor, something that I've encountered is that most of the people who I know who are full-time permaculture practitioners are able to do that either because of resources that have not been spoken about in their work or in their writing. Perhaps if they're a farmer, that means that they were given the land that they grow on, or have some financial resources, either through a trust fund or a first career, that then allows them the opportunity to be a full-time permaculture practitioner in some form or another without necessarily needing to earn what we would think of as a living from the work that they do. I mean, this is something that I think I've spoken some to on the show over the years. I've lived largely in the gift economy. And so for a long time, even though I didn't have a lot of cash on hand, I wasn't worrying about where my next meal was going to come from or where I was going to have a place to stay. That wasn't always true. There were some places where things were a little bit more interesting and did require, asking for some additional help. But generally, that's how I've been able to continue to do this work for so long. Oh, there's my intern, Mr. Duke, making an appearance. We'll see if he wants to come back. But yeah, generally, a lot of folks who I've talked to who are making permaculture their career have ways to make that work. But it's not often from their role as a permaculture designer or educator, but rather through something else. There's some folks who I have on the show who I'm thinking about who have talked about the fact that their day job is as engineers, and so even though they have a well-respected permaculture practice, that if they need to, they can go back to their engineering work. Let's set him down for now. We'll see if he returns. If they need additional income for whatever reason and are not dependent on their permaculture work for a living. So yeah, that's just kind of the place that I come from, is those unacknowledged resources that are available. Another part of the conversation is also that there are a lot of folks, when they complete a permaculture design course, go on to want to teach or do design, leaving a lot of teachers and a lot of designers available looking to replicate what other people are doing and working on already, which kind of floods that marketplace. In my ongoing look at permaculture design courses, there are still some that are being offered in person, but many of those have moved online. And I know from my own work, as I look to kind of restructure a permaculture design class under a different framework, which I'll kind of break down here after a bit, that, there is room for more permaculture educators and that work, but it's how do we provide something that is meaningful to the community beyond just replicating the same PDC over and over again and the same style of design course in the same way. Hey, thanks for joining me here in the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in as I just kind of riff on some of these thoughts on permaculture as a business and for an income. So that's where I go back to this idea that David Holmgren raised with me in one of our conversations about permaculture as a series of practices that we may learn these ideas initially in the landscape, but then we go back and apply it to what it is that we're already doing. And very often that's the first place when I talk with folks who are interested in practicing permaculture full-time is how can they apply these ideas to what it is that they're already doing. Because as I've said before, we need permaculture doctors, permaculture lawyers. In a conversation I had with Rosemary Morrow in our series that we're putting together to kind of document her life was the idea that we need to be teaching permaculture to tradespeople and, the impact that they can have in their area and the differences that they can make by being able to talk with someone when they're building a house about where do you put a window to be able to get good cross flow of air should you not be able to run an air conditioner or fans or something because the power's out, as we're facing climate change and all the weather weirding that comes with that, designing for that kind of a future. And so educating tradespeople is an important piece of that. But at least as I encounter the permaculture design course in the United States, a lot of it is still what Bill initially taught back in the 1980s. And as I understand from talking with Joel Glansberg and some of the people who studied permaculture with Bill in those early days, the permaculture design course as it's now taught was originally designed for people who were already working the landscape. And so how do we take a core framework and make it more available and accessible to where people are? Yes, to have that conversation in the landscape because of how radical of a practice it is to grow food or know how to forage food or gain food from the landscape and how liberating that can be, but then to be able to make it applicable to the context that people come from. And yes, Garden of Whedon, that's part of the conversation that I've been having and have had with people who are doing this work who are not trying to just replicate the PDC. Garden said here in the chat, it's very true. To have a wage to live on or raise a family, you need to be in high demand. And that's where looking at the people who I know who are engaging in permaculture in the landscape and making a living are usually running nursery businesses or offering design and implementation. That idea of graduating from a permaculture design course and going off and helping people design is not as easy unless you live in the right place with a good population, a good outreach. It was one of the reasons why I moved more heavily into the media space and then went on to a program in environmental education and resource management, was because where I was living in central Pennsylvania for a long time, there just wasn't a large enough population to support permaculture design by itself. And I wasn't in a place where I felt that I could run a landscaping company and do the implementation to go with it. And so that was kind of a decision that was made for me in the process. But yeah, the folks who I know who make a full-time living and an income from their permaculture related practices are involved in landscaping so that they can not only design but also help people implement, or and or they are running nursery businesses. And there are a lot of people who I know of who do the nursery business side, and that seems to be really, really successful. I don't recall if it was in the interview at the time, but when I visited Dave and Lee O'Neill at Radical Roots Farm a number of years ago, they're here in Western Virginia, that was part of our conversation, is that a large portion of their income came from plant starts in the spring, and that got them over the gap to when their food crops were going to be harvestable that they could then take to farmers markets and sell. Michael Judd, I know, who I've had on the show a number of times, who's up in Frederick, also does nursery work. One of my mentors over the years, Dale Hendricks, who runs Greenlight Plants, has been very heavily into the perennial plant growth over the years and had a long life as a nurseryman. Similarly, Akiva Silver. And where I find that the nursery business really comes together for a lot of people is that it doesn't require a lot of land and has a relatively rapid turnaround time. For some folks, I've heard that they'll buy the end of year stock and, pot up a bunch of whips and saplings and carry them through until the spring. They're a little bit larger, have a little bit more value, and then they can sell them to their clients. So yeah, those are the two businesses that when I talk with folks about who want to start a permaculture oriented business, is about a design and implementation company, functionally a perennial or permaculture landscaping company, combined with or separate to a nursery business. And especially because the nursery businesses, I find, have a lot of appeal because of how many opportunities we can have even in a modest area to be able to travel from our home to go to garden festivals, go sell at farmers markets. There are lots of outlets for our plants and way to diversify that kind of a program. And that's where I do agree with Pierre's thoughts on this question of permaculture businesses, that we need to be talking about this in permaculture design courses for folks who do want to go on and have a permaculture life and lifestyle, to find a way to support that. Or if where they are, as we apply the needs and yields analysis of permaculture to our work, if we find that that isn't something that can be supported, then can we as instructors help students find what it is that they need in the marketplace? Even some simple business development, how to write a business plan or some of those other things as supplementary conversations, as well as having guest instructors come in to talk about the realities of farming, gardening, growing for market, whatever those specialties are that students are interested in, which is where I kind of come to this idea of what the permaculture design course needs to look like, or should look like moving forward, to meet the needs of students where they are. And as I talk with Rosemary Morrow, as I read through the different material, I find that there is room for the creation of essentially a 24-hour permaculture course that digs deeply into the core ideas of permaculture and ecological literacy in a way that teaches people who are not necessarily going to be full-time permaculture practitioners the ideas of permaculture and everything they need to practice it in the landscape or where they live, or apply it to their trade. And then after someone takes that kind of a core 24-hour class, to do an additional 48 hours that gets us to the full 72 hours for a PDC, but to have that second session or section for the course be something that is more of a practicum that can be driven by ideas like the pedagogy of the oppressed, Paulo Freire, and these other thinkers who look at driving education from a student-directed position, so that we can more readily discuss the ideas and concepts of permaculture in a way that meets the context of the students directly, because not everybody is going to be able to apply all of the things that we can touch on in a permaculture design course, while also being able to move and advance this material from what was taught 40 years ago. I think of graduate school when I was studying ecology, and one of the first things my professor spoke to was, what I'm teaching you today is not going to be what you're going to be talking about 10 years from now. But a lot of the permaculture courses that, when I check out the syllabus or course outline, are still very much the same. And being, they're just not adapted to where we are right now and what is applicable to people. And similarly, it's, as I understand, permaculture as a concept is still really growing in Western Europe, the United States, Australia, New Zealand. But when it comes to like Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, South America, that permaculture is being left behind for regenerative agriculture or agroforestry, or these other ideas that kind of fit as general techniques underneath of what we could use within permaculture. And I'm still trying to suss out exactly why that is, but there is a part of me that feels that it is because of how rigorous and standardized the permaculture design course has become, and the more that people have reflected on it being just one thing, that it needs to evolve. And that's where this idea of this like 24-hour class, let's get back to the core of what permaculture is, and then provide space to still deliver a full 72-hour PDC, but in a different context. Not that we're not going to be teaching all the necessary, lingo and jargon, and be able to get people to immerse themselves in the landscape, draw base maps, do analyses, the zone model. All of those things are perfectly vital and still super useful to the practice. But yeah, this other piece should, yes, as Garden says, need to evolve. Let me read your chat here real quick so that I can see what else is coming in. Veritas, what is also lacking to some degree are permaculture lobbying groups that can act as evangelists for the movement, concept, reality, etc. to affect private and public policies. I very much agree with that. And that's where, when I would guest lecture at a permaculture design course, part of my conversation was about, what role do you want to have as a practitioner? Because if you're really good at talking with people, you can move all kinds of policies. In the episode that I just released, that will release for patrons tomorrow and be out publicly on Monday, is a conversation with Rihanna Kowalczyk, who works with Slow Food DC, and a lot of her work over the years has been in policy work. And so that's part of the Permaculture Land and Land Access series that's currently being released. But hearing her talk about the ways that they are able to move the conversation. There's an episode that I released a number of years ago with Joshua Hughes about permaculture and politics. I'll see if I can find that, and I'll drop it in as a comment for this live stream. But that was one of the things that he talked about, is that it would be great if we had people who were permaculture practitioners running for office, or working as lobbyists, or out there telling the stories. And it's kind of one of the spaces that I'm continuing to try to move into. I recently had what I guess you could call was the first interview to teach permaculture at a university as a guest seminar, and looking at it from that lens of permaculture and ecological literacy, to get people who are communications majors to learn these ideas and think in this way, so that then they can be out there speaking in these kinds of terms. And here's the issue with, also Veritas to continue, the issue with that is that most permaculture and farmer types aren't the lobbyist types, from what I can see in my personal and professional associations. Yeah, I would agree. I think that it takes a certain kind of person to throw yourself out there. and to put yourself into a kind of a place of vulnerability, and to be able to take the pushback and the feedback that you receive to argue for these ideas, to push for them. And so, yeah, being a lobbyist or pushing for these kinds of policies, it takes time and work and experience that not all of us has. And it took me quite some time to get to know, like, who are the gatekeepers? Who should I speak to? Who are the people who are the actual people in the place of power? Um, and like, I helped change some policy when it came to backyard chickens, and I really enjoyed the process, but it took a while to find out, like, how should a piece of legislation be written for a particular audience, to put it in front of them, to get them to actually consider the idea. In the small town where I made that happen, sitting and getting to know the town secretary, because I knew if I called her and wanted to submit something, that I was better off sending it to her so that she could print it out and put it in front of the town manager, and then, you know, put print out more copies to put them in and get them on the schedule for the board meetings, so that those kinds of ideas could be approved. And, just the experience that comes from walking down a lot of these roads and figuring out these different pieces. They're a lot of the conversations that I think that we need to be having. And so, that's why where I kind of started here, to get your feedback, your thoughts on these kinds of ideas as the chat continues, and I'll get back to that here in a second, to be able to see and respond where your thoughts are, and then be able to develop either live calls or write out some more material so that we can talk about how to engage in policy practices. What are the kinds of steps you need to do to work as a professional in these different ways while applying permaculture to what you do? Um, oh, and yeah, I agree that both Whedon and Veritas both mention about the early days of permaculture, and I agree. It's, even though this has been going on since the late 1970s. I mean, I'm 42 now, and discovered permaculture a little over 24 years ago now, I guess it is. But, looking at the history of it, there was quite a dearth in the literature that was available and the material that was available, and how many people were teaching permaculture for a while and its accessibility. And with your question, Whedon, about Toby Hemingway and Andrew Millison teaching at universities without major compromise, I think that whether or not I don't quite think permaculture as a university discipline is quite ready, but we're real close. There's some material that needs to be brought in to make a permaculture design course a bit more multidisciplinary, in order to offer it perhaps as a degree track. But I certainly feel that there is plenty of room to teach permaculture as an elective, or to offer a permaculture design course as a advanced study for students, those junior senior years as graduates, or perhaps as in cooperation with a master's program on sustainability or regenerative ag. And it's where, like, my intersection with this comes in is a friend recommended that I speak to someone at a college, and in our conversation it emerged about, like, hey, what would you like to teach? And we started talking about permaculture and ecological literacy, and then the invitation opened up to submit additional materials. But I do think that if we're going to go into university spaces, that it's not necessarily a question of asking the university to meet us where we're at, but coming up to the level that the university is requesting or expecting, so that we're meeting them where they're at, in a meaningful way. And I need to go back and double check Andrew's course. It's been a while since I looked at it. My understanding is that he is teaching as part of OSU's extension program, and I don't know if that's being taught for credit or if it is just something that's being offered through the university system. And that's just a little bit of my ignorance there that I haven't checked into that, because last time I did, it was being offered. It was not being offered as credit for credit hours, whereas that's something with this invitation that I've had. It is to teach a course that students can take for credit as an elective, and so yeah, that's where I'm kind of interested in it. What about the green movement? I apologize. Reading that question, I had a lot of hope for the green movement for quite some time here in the United States, but I'm yeah, at like a national level, I'm just not really sure. I am not. Yeah, I've been kind of disenfranchised by the green movement in the U.S. because of what's happening on the national level, where I do see um, interaction, at least in the United States, is with the DSA. What is that? The Democratic Socialists of America. The DSA is doing a lot of direct action with gardening and other programming and getting people involved in a lot of mutual aid and other kind of leftist practices that also provide room to do gardening. There's a bit more of that in the conversation I mentioned earlier, which, as I say, will be out tomorrow for patrons on Patreon. That's patreon.com/permaculture podcast, or general release on Monday. Rihanna talks a lot about how, she's interfacing and overlaying these models, and that's where I think we could see some movement. Though I will look at going back and seeing what my local green organization is. Oh, thank you for letting me know about that. Yeah, it's a large part of my work over the years has just been, I'll just do it. I will just do what I need to get these kinds of things done, because a lot of the programs and organizations, by the time I get anything, I can work with them to get some things spun up. It takes so much more time and energy than just, kind of getting it done. Um, do, do, do. So there with that question, Whedon, is that permaculture could benefit from professional expertise in that question? Because if so, I agree, and that's where I would like to see a kind of just a bunch of us to come together and maybe do some seminars or a permaculture conference of some kind. Maybe we can do it virtually, of people who are practicing permaculture professionally from different backgrounds to talk about this, the different ways that they are doing, policy changes and programming, who are the on the ground landscapers and implementers, like Jessie Bloom of, I think her organization is Bloom Design, has been doing a lot of work in that direction. So now that we say that, I feel like perhaps I should start reaching out to some folks and try to organize a conference of permaculture professionals to discuss what it is that they're doing. Not now, not in the months that remain for 2021, but maybe that's something that we can look at for late 2022. Do something online, make it inexpensive, accessible, and have some people, just come and speak for maybe we can just do it for one day. Anyway, if you have done conference organizing, I have, but if you're watching this and you've done some of that and you'd like to help spearhead a professional permaculture conference to bring in some folks, both inside and outside the community, to talk about what we can do to advance our expertise, I'd love to hear that. When it comes to teaching permaculture as part of agronomy, I do love John Kemp's work. It was great to have him on the show. We still are in touch from time to time, and just what he's doing with that soil science, and also like Elaine Ingham's work is still absolutely amazing, and I'm starting to see more of that kind of idea integrated into other practices and professions, which is great to see. Yeah, there's some really good work there on the edge. Thank you for mentioning John. He could be a good person to bring in. But yeah, yeah, that really, now that this has come across, it sounds like a great idea. Um, so yeah, let me float that out to some people who I know and see what we would need to do an online summit. Maybe even like I'm working with Future Harvest, which is my local sustainable agriculture organization. I could also work with them to see about getting some of their farmers and other folks to come in and talk to permaculture folks as I continue to to know more of those people. Um, yeah, that sounds like a really great idea. I will put that on my list of things to do. Um, yeah. So then, with everything that we've covered, do you have any other questions or thoughts that you want to drop into the chat? I've kind of gone around with all the core ideas that I wanted to touch on today. And of course, would love to dive into any of this further. So if you have any thoughts right now that you'd like to talk about live while we're together, as I say, drop those into the chat. If you're watching this video on a replay, feel free to leave a comment below and I can either address it in an upcoming live stream or in a reply. You, of course, can always get in touch with me directly if there's something that you're working on. My email address is show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. You can give me a call if you would like, 717-827-6266. That's also where you can shoot me a text message as well. If for some reason I don't answer, because I tend to work between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern and be offline as much as I can after that, if you call, feel free to leave a message and I can take it from there. Thank you, Corinne, for dropping that in there. Yes, Bloom Ecological Services. And I mentioned Jesse because of a conversation we had behind the scenes about the, if you will, glut of permaculture designers that are out there that are available to help with designs or talk to people, but without the ability to move from that concept design. They can do the analysis and do a conceptual design, but getting from there to like construction plans or an implementation plan, there's a gap that we need to be discussing and filling. And it's where like I see a need within the education. And also because permaculture designs very often now, even those analytical and conceptual designs, are looking more and more like landscape architecture designs. And I feel as professionals, we need to get away from that. As I understand, at least in the United States, landscape architects are a licensed profession as well as their title. And so I would like to see less of that similarity so that we can stand on our own while also not being confused with landscape architects. But there is a lot of room for us to be working with landscape architects on the education of how to make the work that they're doing more regenerative, more restorative, and with greater permanence for themselves, their clients, and the world. So, yeah. And just, yeah, how can we continue to move forward as permaculture practitioners? And it's where I wish that there was more mentoring available, and is part of why I kind of put myself out there. If someone wants to do this kind of work, get in touch with me. Let's have a conversation without it needing to be part of a formal advanced education. Though I would definitely like to see some truly advanced permaculture classes other than the teacher training and some of the related pieces that are out there. The only one that I've seen that really I feel comfortable with as an advanced permaculture class was one that Dave Jackie was offering a couple of years ago, which really got more into like landscape architecture for permaculture practitioners, plant selection, ecological literacy, making effective plant lists, research that goes into that. So like what Dave was offering back then was really awesome, but I haven't seen that pop up anywhere recently. Again, I wish that I were omniscient when it came to my knowledge of everything going on in the permaculture community. So if you're watching this and you have some information about what Dave's been doing or other programs that are out there, please let me know. But yeah, the ones that keep popping up on my searches and what people are sharing with me are largely PDCs, which are, now mostly online, or they are teacher trainings. And even those appear to be becoming fewer and fewer. And yeah, so as I just work through some of this and try to figure out how do we make all of this easier to access, more affordable, less expensive, while delivering high quality content and making sure not only that everyone who is going through these courses can in some way earn back the cost in their daily lives, but also make sure that the teachers and everybody else who are doing the work are getting paid for it. That's, yeah, it's something, as I'm sure you know, that I've worked on and worked through a number of times as I look for real solid stability, but also hearing from other permaculture instructors about wanting to stay in this field, but trying to figure out how. And it was kind of disheartening while I was on sabbatical earlier this year, finding out that several of my colleagues had left entirely. People who were, one was a permaculture oriented podcaster who was doing a lot of classes that were really back to nature on foraging and the landscape that was really awesome. Another was doing some great education around young children. And yeah, both of them are no longer practicing. Their websites and everything are gone. And it was, yeah, kind of strange to see that. And as I continue, as I say, having these conversations, finding out who's still here, who isn't. The mention earlier about Toby Hemingway, I really miss Toby. He's one of the folks who had turned into a bit of a mentor in some conversations we were having, and we had been lining up a follow-up interview when I was lining up when we were having that conversation about that interview was when he was sick, and he had never said anything to me. We were just talking as if everything was just completely okay and planning for our next conversation, and then he was gone. And it's hard sometimes, some of those, and it's where there's so much information and knowledge that are locked in these conversations, and people who, I've joked sometimes that I could release a new episode of the Permaculture Podcast every day with a different guest for the next 5 years and not cover everyone who is on my potential guest list. And there's just so much knowledge that I would love to be able to capture and save and archive, because once those folks are gone, it goes with them. Many of them aren't book authors. They're teachers, they're foragers, they're gardeners. They're someone who has a great deal of knowledge, but we're never going to hear from them. And that's also why, I try to find guests for the show who are people who haven't necessarily written books, who haven't currently been, in the public sphere. And so I always want to be able to feature some of those lesser known voices and let them shine through, and so that we can hear them and archive and save that. So, and Veritas, I agree that permaculture is a way of life, but there's also a lot of people who are interested in this and want to engage and find more, and want to take classes and learn, and are asking for people to come and help them with their landscapes and other things. And while we live in this period of transition, ideally for me, I would love nothing more than just to be able to teach all day, every day, release episodes all day, every day. But yeah, I just feel that for some of us it is this period of transition, and how do we do both while, still needing to, yeah, just cover our ability to live. And sometimes that's strange too. While, yeah, just everything that goes with it. Anyway, I don't want to go down that too far. I do, I still continue to look for alternative ways to help people with what it is that they're engaged in. I will give anybody some of my time if they want to send me an email, text me, call me. There's hundreds and hundreds of hours of material in the archives of the show that are offered at no cost at point of entry, and have been supported, via the Patreon page through direct donations by listeners for the years. And those are the kinds of things that I want to continue to engage and explore while still offering, classes and other things. So that's one that I'm always interested in hearing more. Like if people have ideas about how they make that work and how it functions for them. And also, like I was saying earlier, though, it's also like the business of permaculture is interesting because it's many people who I know who are in the public space within permaculture, authors and others, are not making their living off of what we might think that they're doing. And so it is through perhaps a teaching job, a day job of some kind. I know folks who work in nonprofit spaces part-time because that's where they're making their regular income that allows them to do this. And just, yeah, there's so many different ways that we are all kind of cobbling together a living. And I guess that's something that I should have mentioned in the beginning that comes to mind in the moment, is that most of the folks who I think of, with the exception of like Jesse and a couple of others, Jesse Bloom, who are doing this full time through their everyday businesses, most of us are cobbling a lifestyle together. I run the podcast and have multiple donation streams. I have multiple income streams by offering consultations, meanderings. I partner with some organizations to help them advertise. Particularly, I like to work with nonprofits that we can do in-kind exchanges, and then so I can share that information either via social media or on the show. So if you are someone who is working with a nonprofit and you have a program that you feel would be a good fit for the show, let me know. We can talk and come up with something in kind to donate to one another, so that there's no financial cost to do so. We do a lot of there's a lot of partnerships that go on behind the scenes and referrals, and that's where, like, with my meanderings and consultations, that if someone comes and talks to me and I'm not the right fit for them, or I don't feel that it would be good for us to work together, I still want to try to find them someone who they can work with. I've done work trades with people in the past on the show. Just there's been a lot of things that we've been doing to cobble things together. But like I say, it's also like for 2022, the question that was the impetus for this live stream was, what kind of classes or courses would people want? And Pierre asked about permaculture as a business. And that spawned this as something that I wanted to kind of speak to. And yeah, just all the different ways that almost everybody I know is making a living at it. And Corinne, yes, I agree. Jesse is doing some great work on that personal, particularly like Zone 0, Zone 00, Zone 1 permaculture work, in addition to all the pieces that she does in the landscape. She is someone who is on my list for next year. In December, I will be interviewing Katie Bowman for to start a series on permaculture, health, and wellness, and what we can do to engage in true, deep self-care. And so I'm looking at having Katie on to talk about movement and play and what that means for our physical well-being, There's a personal trainer whose work I really like out of Pittsburgh, um, who I'd like to talk to about, health and healthy living. There's some folks I want to talk to about herbal medicine and medicinal mushrooms, including psychedelic mushrooms for mental health care. And then some people such as Jesse about what we can do when it comes to our internal landscape and creating sanctuaries and spaces, and to revisit some of the things that Jesse and I talked about before about being trauma informed. And then I will probably write my own script to talk about my own experiences growing up in a radical historical peace church. If you're not, you may have heard of the Quakers, which are pretty well known as a historical peace church. I grew up Brethren, which is one of the Anabaptist traditions related to the Amish and Mennonite, which is where a lot of the ideas that fuel the show and my love of people and having a human-centered, biophilic approach to permaculture comes from those experiences of growing up in that church and being raised in a way that was meant to be radically nonviolent, and my experiences with nonviolent communication. But yeah, to visit that as part of that series. Anyway, going on a little bit there, but I'm putting those together so that series on permaculture, health and wellness should be out second quarter of 2022, and will be similar to this series that's currently coming out on permaculture land and land access, where I do a series of interviews with different people to speak with them about their specialty, ask each of them the same question that will then be compiled into an episode where you can hear each of them respond to that one question, and then with my intro and ending on it. Which reminds me, if you've been listening to the Permaculture Land and Land Access series, because of how different that is from what I've normally done, let me know what your thoughts are on it. There are 3 episodes remaining before all of that lands. Rihanna Kowalczyk, the land access question, and then my wrap up. But once that's done, or if you have feedback now, I'd love to hear about it with just the way that that's coming together with the more frequent releases, the shorter interviews, shorter episodes, to see if that's something you'd like more of. And as I say, we'll be revisiting this next year as well to try that again. Similarly, the series with Rosemary Morrow, which I've been speaking about as part of the fall fundraiser, is going really well. We've got 4 sessions recorded already with between 5 and 6 hours of raw material to produce. But more than just what's coming together for that series is that the content is like sitting at Rosemary's table and receiving a personal introduction to permaculture from Rosemary Morrow. And it is just, I am super thankful for her being open to the time that we're spending together to have the conversation and what's coming out of it. I think it's going to be something really amazing and special for people, and really, really looking forward to sharing that with you, which will be out sometime in 2022. That's in coordination with her forthcoming book. So yeah, that'll be out here in a bit. My understanding is that the manuscript is back for the last read through, so should be coming to press and out here hopefully within about the next 6 months. Yeah, and then you'll start to hear some things from me here in the next few weeks about a retreat that I'm planning for next fall. We're still working out the details on the exact site, so I don't want to say where, but it will be near Asheville, North Carolina, to offer that kind of 24-hour permaculture for non-permaculture professional style course that also serves as an introduction for a permaculture design course. We're looking at planning it over 4 days. People can come in. We'll be at a retreat center. All the food will be prepared for us, catered, so all we need to do is relax and enjoy the experience of coming together and having a student-directed, facilitated conversation about ecological design and permaculture, and to kind of develop those bones together in person through an ongoing dialogue. I'm also launching the environmental enrichment for homeschooling families. I kind of have a framework together for that. So I know, Corinne, you and I have been exchanging information and thoughts and ideas on that, which I'm really thankful for. If we could follow up some more on that, I'd like to dive in and see, as I think I said in my one message, how I might be able to adapt that a bit more to your situation, because I am right now, what I have outlined is kind of an ongoing instruction series for homeschooling families to provide them additional material to supplement their math and language skills, in the vein of unschooling, democratic education, and environmental education, because my son is also unschooled, and so that's something that I'm familiar with. But yeah, so I have like a program outline, but I'm looking to continue to modify and develop that to make it more accessible. So if you're listening to this and are a homeschooling family, please email me, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. I can send you the kind of outline and idea, and we can talk about it from there. Similarly, with this like bones of a PDC, I'm looking to offer that online for anybody who would like a deep dive into the core ideas of permaculture. And then once anyone has taken that we will put together that kind of like permaculture practicum around landless spaces, around permaculture for small spaces or cities, and so that we all have the same core education together and experience, but then depending on your particular interests, we can develop a PDC then that fits your needs in a small group fashion. Also, ideally, to make that kind of high touch approach more affordable. It's been one of my pieces that trying to deliver a broad permaculture design course that meets all the students' needs in the way that I would like to is just very time consuming for myself, and winds up being a bit more expensive than I would like. I think that this kind of a bones PDC is something that could be taught to a large group for a lower cost, and then we can do the individual the more individualized small group component, the additional 48 hours with smaller classes, with smaller group sizes, and to be more focused. So, but more on that here as that comes together, and yeah, we'll see what we can do. With everything that I'm doing, I also would like to be able to offer like scholarships, work trades, and other things. So if you've sat through this entire video and anything that you're working on, if there's something that you do in your life that you would like to do a work trade, or we can come to some kind of an in-kind agreement or something like that, I am more than happy to have a conversation in exchange for mentoring, consultations, any of the classes that I'm working on or things like that. Let's sit down and talk and see if we can work together. Yeah, so there we kind of come full circle from that monetized side of things back to the gift economy and how we can work together. So thank you everybody for being a part of this, for sharing your thoughts. I'm glad to hear from you and what you had to say. And yeah, if you didn't catch this live, please feel free to drop a comment in the drop a comment for the video, and I will get back to you. Or of course, as I said earlier, feel free to get in touch, give me a call, send me an email, however you'd like to reach out, and we can take the conversation from here. So thank you everybody for being a part of this. We'll have another one of these in 2 weeks. That will be in the evening, to make that a bit more accessible for folks here in the United States who will be finishing their day. Of course, I would love to see you. For those of you who are here with me today, for you to join me. And then, yeah, Corinne, I will drop you an email about some of those thoughts that I had here in a couple of minutes. So take care, everybody, and have a great rest of your week, an amazing weekend, and we'll talk again soon. As always, wherever you are, whatever you do, spend each day taking care of Earth, yourself, and each other.